Welcome to Tokunbo. My name is Jola Naibi, and in this limited podcast series, I'll be having conversations with Nigerian storytellers living in the diaspora. We will talk about the stories they tell, the way the stories are told, the way the stories are received, and so much more. Welcome to Tokunbo.
And so writing became my outlet. I've always been I said quite early because my dad was a reader too, and so there were always books in the house, and that was his way. He would buy us books. Like if he needed something, he would buy us books, and then I had the privilege really of being, because he was a university professor, so there were access to books like at the library in UI, and so I've always been around books.
Too often when I think of the city of Ibadan, I always think of Yejide Kilanko because she wears the fact that she comes from Ibadan, grew up in Ibadan, like a badge of honor, and that's a good thing. And she is my guest on this week's episode of Tokunbo. All right. Well, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know that you are super busy. Let me see if I can get this right when it comes to your professional profile. Writer, social worker, PhD candidate.
Yes.
Okay. And as a writer, you have written short and long pieces and poetry. I know that you've written for adults, and those books include Daughters Who Walk This Path, Chasing Butterflies, A Good Name. You've also written for children, Juba and the Fireball, There Is an Elephant in My Wardrobe. And then, of course, we mustn't forget that your short story, This Tangible Thing, was shortlisted for the 2023 Caine Prize. So you have had quite an admirable writing journey. Let's start at the very beginning. So you grew up in the ancient and magnificent city of Ibadan.
Yes.
When did you first start writing, and was there a particular set of circumstances that led you to begin crafting stories?
So I grew up in Ibadan, and then when I was 10, I went to boarding school, and I went to Federal Government Girls College Onitsha in Anambra State, and that was a very I wanted to go, so it wasn't like no one forced me to go. I read a story about Mr. Bako and his family, and they talked about visiting River Niger and the River Niger Bridge, and so I wanted to see the River Niger Bridge. So when it was time to do the common entrance exam, so I asked my dad, I said, I would like to go to boarding school. Can I go to FGC Onitsha? And he was like, okay, if you pass and they take you. So that was my first choice, and they took me. So that's how I ended up in Onitsha. So it was my desire to go, but I don't think, of course, that was 9-year-old child, you don't understand how far.
Onitsha is. Or the concept of homesickness.
Yes, you don't understand how far Onitsha is from Ibadan. You don't understand, it's very different. Like you have to fetch water, you have to, just so many things that's part of being in boarding school. So that was what led to me writing. And so I started writing poetry first.
Okay.
And so that was around 12. And it was about just, I needed an outlet to kind of process all the emotions that I was feeling. I was lonely. I was not lonely because I was around people. I think I was homesick. I think that's not lonely, homesick. Because it was so far and I didn't have a guardian. I remember my dad telling me, he said, if you go to Onitsha, we don't know anyone in the east that would come and visit you. So you're not going to, and the only time he came to Onitsha was the day he dropped me. That was the time he came to see. My mom came twice. The first day they dropped me, and then she came one other time. So I had to, so I didn't, visiting days, I didn't have any guests. And so that was very hard for me. And so writing became my outlet. I've always been I said quite early because my dad was a reader too. And so there were always books in the house. And that was his way, he would buy us books. Like if he needed something, he would buy us books. And then I had the privilege really of being, because he was a university professor. So there were access to books like at the library in UI. I remember they had
the University of Ibadan, for those of us
who grew up University of Ibadan. Yes, and the Aberdeen Media Resources, they had a library. And so I've always been around books. And so that was always my thing. So I've always been a good reader. And so, but that was when I started writing poetry. And So all through Onitsha, I wrote poetry. And then when I got to University of Ibadan, I studied political science at the University of Ibadan. And I joined we had a press organization in my hall. I was a Queen Edia Hall. And at political science department, I joined the press as well. And so I started writing like just short pieces, like almost like nonfiction pieces and poetry and short stories. And we'll post them up in the board. So that was really how it started. It was from poetry, and then it went to like nonfiction and still a little bit of short stories until Daughters. So that was 2009. So that really was my journey. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about Daughters, but then it's interesting what you said about the way your journey was. So you started writing, I mean, if I can be as bold to say that, out of kind of nostalgia, homesickness, and it's the creative process for you. Was it easy for you to write, knowing that, I mean, the loneliness that you felt, no one around you, is that how you were able to tap into those emotions to create?
Yeah.
Oh,
For me, writing has always been the way I process my world.
got it.
And even from that age, right? It was more like, so just, like, because I felt like it was a way kind of like now, like as a therapist, externalizing, externalizing the emotions I had. So once I put them on paper, it was easier to manage. Right. So once I had them down on paper and I could, it was tangible, I could look at it. And then, so that gave me a chance to, and then even when I was in university, I was writing about things that were going around me.
Yeah.
Like whether it was elections or whether it was student politics, whether it was, relationship stuff, like, and so it's always been a way that, that I can just, like, I'm thinking about something. So everything I write, even till now, it's based on something I'm thinking about, something I experienced, something someone around me experienced, something I want to know more about. Writing for me has always been a way to, like, okay, just tease things out. Because I spend a lot of time in my head. And so I spend a lot
Like most writers, yeah.
yeah, in my head, and I'm thinking about stuff, and so writing for me has always been like, okay, I'm trying to understand something. I'm trying to express something. I'm trying to something is heavy in my chest. I need to bring it out. And so that's what writing is for me.
And I like the way I mean, it's an interesting transition. So your foundation as a writer is from poetry. And it leads me to my next question, because I read somewhere that Daughters Who Walk This Path started out as a poem called Silence Speaks.
Yes.
So that's something completely foreign to me, because for me, writing is prose. And other people say I write good poetry. You're always your biggest critic. But how did that happen? How did you transition a story from a poem to a full-length novel? And how long did it take?
Okay, so 2009 June, because my journey was a bit. I left Nigeria, moved to the States, moved to Canada, went back to school, became a social worker, and so 2009 June was when I'd finished my master's. Started as I was working in child protection,
Okay.
and the child protection social worker, I had to investigate, like cases of child sexual abuse and things like that, and that was very hard for me, and so that was what led to that poem called Silence Speaks. We really was where a child discloses to their parents and says, oh, uncle has been coming to my room at night. And so when I shared that poem on Facebook, actually, and I got a lot of like private response to it. People just, saying, oh, this was my story. And so I was like, wow. And I didn't expect it. And and because so this was a story, the poem was set in Nigeria. And so it made me start thinking about maybe I should write a story that is set in Nigeria. And so really the Silence Speaks became kind of like just the nucleus of the story, and then things were just like a web, like the threads were just coming out of it and spreading and spreading. And then so that was from like June to, I would say, 6 months, so the end of 2009. And I gave it to a friend, so I think it was about 40,000 words, and they were like, this isn't bad. And like I'm like, because that was my very first manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
I never even thought about writing a novel. That was a funny thing. That wasn't not on my radar. It was just like I love reading. I enjoy writing up people's stories. But if I was going to ever write anything, I thought it was going to be a poetry collection. I
Okay.
didn't think it was going to be prose. And so when a couple of who read it were like, you know what, maybe you should, to give me some feedback. So I'm like, okay, I went back and I worked on another 6 months on the book. So after a year, I had about 60 something, just odd 64,000 or so manuscript. And then I remember that summer of 2010, I came to Nigeria for a visit. And
Okay.
a friend of mine, a very good friend, my friend forever, we're talking. So I told her, and then she told me about Adobe Nwabani. So Adobe
Okay.
Nwabani went to your University of Ibadan as well, and she studied psychology. And so we were in the same faculty because I did political science. So I knew her. And so she was
Mm-hmm.
telling me, she said, "Oh, do you know Adobe wrote a book? I do not come to you by chance."
Yes.
Like, really? She's like, yeah, she wrote a book. So I'm like, okay, when I get back to Canada, I'll find the book and read it. And then I think I searched for it. I've read the book, and then I searched for it on just about Adobe on the internet, and then I came across an article that she wrote. I believe it says you don't have to swim across the Atlantic. My memory is foggy, but I think maybe that's the title of the article.
Mm-hmm.
She talked about how she was able to get an agent from Nigeria.
Oh,
How she
wow.
was able to get a great agent from Nigeria, and she didn't have to. And so I said, oh, well, she could do it from Nigeria. The good thing that I can't swim, but I'm already across. You know,
That's a good one.
so I'm like, that works for me. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to learn how to write a query letter. I'm going to put together a list of literary agents, and I was going to try and shop the book around. And so I think I made up agentquery.com. I don't know if it still exists,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the website I went to, read different, agency requirements, what they were looking for, and I compiled 16 names. At the last minute, I added the name of Adobe's agent.
Okay.
And I was like, he already has, a Nigerian author. He would want another person. But that was the person who became my agent. He's no longer my agent, but he was such
A champion of the book.
oh my goodness, just a champion of book. I would never ever forget the contributions that he made, to me as a writer, to that book. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was how the story started. I signed up with Dan in September of 2010, and that was it. And all
Interesting.
of a sudden, I was like, wow, you're writing a book.
You're a writer, and you are actually a writer. And it's funny. I thank you for sharing that. It's interesting how it's kind of like a roundabout way for you becoming an actual prose writer. I wanted to latch on to something that you said earlier. You grew up in Nigeria, lived in the United States, and later moved to Canada. How has it influenced the way you see and tell Nigerian stories, having that diasporic lens?
Yeah, I think um, the distance from home gives you a different perspective. Like in terms of now, either you're submerged in it or you're removed from something. That you can
Mm-hmm.
look at it in a different way. I know for sometimes I struggle sometimes because I feel like I have been away from home for a long time. It will
Mm-hmm.
be 25 years in June.
About the same time with me as well.
Yeah. So and I wonder, I'm like, okay. And so I'm always thinking, am I doing if I'm writing something contemporary that's not because Daughters was easy for me. I said it in the Times that I grew up in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? So, but now I'm like, things have changed so much.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, okay, but it's not, it's fiction in a way, right? I'm writing fiction. So this is not like if you want a nonfiction book about what is really, really current, then that's the expectation that what you're representing in the book represent the Nigeria of 2024. And so I try to make sure when I'm getting my beta readers to get people who live in Nigeria who can tell me, oh no, it's not like this. And as much as it's fiction, I don't want to misrepresent something that could cause harm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then even recognizing the privilege, some privileges I've had in terms of being a writer here, because I'm able to rely on some things, like I'm able to network better. I'm able to. Someone said, you know what, you have, even just having a constant light supply. To be able to
Oh,
sit
wow.
down and write,
And plan to write at 4, saying that I want to write at 4 p.m. and not sending prayers up to God saying that please let there be light when I'm writing.
you know,
Yeah.
like even all those things, like being able to, and so I think I always remind myself of that. that, do justice to the story. Just be thankful for the privilege of the privileges you have by the virtue of where you're living. And but for me, it is still, but I feel that it's still my home. It's still a big part of who I am. And so that I do have the because I say, well, there's people say, well, if you're somewhere, why are you not writing stories about where you are? Like you keep writing about stories back home.
They're a lot more interesting, and they're a lot, but I sorry to interrupt you. You touched on something which is something that I have been struggling with for a long time. I haven't found the solution yet, but because we've been away from Nigeria for about the same time, and when I write fiction, I feel like I'm not qualified to write about contemporary Nigeria because I haven't lived there. And so, and for me, when I began writing, it was almost as if to remember and also to kind of raise awareness, because I don't know if you had this experience, but there are a lot of people who have a very distorted opinion or understanding of what it means to have grown up in an African city. You grew up in Ibadan, I grew up in Lagos. And I mean, I've had people ask me, also, you have cars in Lagos. And I'm like, that is such, I mean, I don't take it, I'm not offended anymore, because I realize that the sorts of media that they're consuming probably contributes to the ignorance. But going back to my original question, how easy is it for you as a writer to write about contemporary Nigeria? You mentioned your better readers. I've had people say that they spend like 3 months in Nigeria just to immerse themselves in the current situation, even though they're, full-time residents overseas. Is it easy for you to bring up that contemporary Nigeria, or is it something that you feel that I need to be there in order to be able to tell the story from an authentic perspective?
Yeah, no, I don't feel that I need to be there. I think if I could, it would be helpful, but it just doesn't work for my life.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I try to immerse myself in as much content, Nigerian content as possible. That's the beauty of the internet and the beauty of YouTube, and you can watch videos. I watch a lot of bloggers actually. I find bloggers very helpful. I have travel bloggers, like because they're traveling around the country. Or I remember there was a phase of the I just got back. And so they're giving you a perspective, giving you a view of like, okay, I've lived in a country for this, or I'm going back now. These are my experiences, and so I think that's been really helpful for me, watching the content that other people have made in terms of I'm going back to Nigeria, or there's so many young Nigerians doing fantastic things, right?
That is true.
Yeah, so watching all that helps. So
give a shout out to some of the bloggers who have influenced.
Oh my goodness! Now I have to go find names. I'm
very
bad, but I just go and I just go.
I mean, you've been such a treasure. I understand.
Exactly. So, but I'm shouting out to all the Nigerian bloggers on YouTube who put out content, about traveling back to Nigeria, about relocating back to Nigeria. You guys are doing amazing work. Amazing work. It's helpful to someone like me. So keep on doing your great thing. And so.
Thank you for that shout out. So interestingly enough, I mean, even though the times have changed, the culture still remains the same. There's certain things that are kind of like evergreen. How do you approach weaving Nigerian cultural elements in the language, traditions, family dynamics into your stories without oversimplifying or exoticizing them for a global audience? So
I think first, I think it's when I'm writing, my first audience is me. Right. So at that point, I'm not thinking about, oh, what would somebody who's Canadian or American or whatever nationality think about it. I'm just writing about what does the story mean. And it's usually when you're trying to sell the book or when the editor or the other one says, oh, well, this isn't really clear. But at that point, when I'm writing the story, I'm not thinking about that.
So have you ever received any pushback from, your editors or anyone else who's reading the book in order to take it to the publication stage where it's like, this isn't clear, and then you feel pressured to kind of revise it to make it, I mean, I'm thinking, and this is not a judgment on anyone, but I remember reading some Nigerian authors, and I can tell when they've gone through the wire of, a non-Nigerian editor has edited. So they call Ewa going being put in, and I'm like, when did we start calling that? You understand? And I understand it. Like I said, there's
Mm.
no judgment. But have you ever encountered that where you feel that you have to revise it in order to make it something you're over describing or over explaining something just because the first line editor or somebody who's non-Nigerian doesn't understand it?
Well, I haven't gone as far as beans pudding yet. Uh, But I think I've had, like, I think one of the things is or writing in italics, right? Writing
Yeah.
non-English words, right?
Yes.
So that's another thing. Like, okay, do you really have to put in italics and then go back and forth, or even things like I have had to like explain, So for me, but I look at it in terms of context. Okay, how
Mm.
do I put in a story that at least gives you some context? Because I'm thinking if I'm reading a book that is written by a Russian writer or written by a writer of another an ethnicity, nationality or race, I'm not looking for you to explain everything to me.
Yes.
Like even as a child, I read adult books. Nobody was there saying, okay, there was no glossary at the back. There was nothing.
Yes. Yes.
I learned that I had to go and research, find the word. I know that, right? People say, oh, well, people don't have time these days. You want to make things as simple as possible for them. But if for me it breaks up the story,
Yes.
then it's not. I don't think that's the ideal. I can find a way to provide other context to explain what that word means. But I don't think I feel like I have to like write the whole thing out for you. Because then I feel it breaks up the momentum of the story.
That's true. That's true. I wanted to pivot a little bit in terms of one of the unique things about your writing career is how I mentioned this before. You blur the lines between genres, so from poetry to short fiction and longer fiction. But then there's children's books, and one thing I admire about you is you have distinguished yourself by addressing that deficit of representation when it comes to children's books. It's a space that I am also entering, and it's also an important space because, and I'm paraphrasing here, I read something that's really kind of like showcases the importance of representation, where it's like it said something along the lines of children need to see that other kinds of children can be heroes of the story, and other kinds of children need to see themselves as heroes of stories.
Yeah.
And so just a quick understanding of what led you, was it that deficit in representation that led you to realize that I need to contribute something important to this space? And what was the process, the creative process like for you when it comes to writing a children's book?
So I think first I work with children. So because I'm still at the same agency, but I moved from child protection to children's mental health.
Okay.
And so that's been since 2011, I believe.
Okay.
So I've been doing that. So I work primarily with children from 5 to 8 when they age out at 18, doing therapy. And so I've always had, and one thing when you're working with children, you have to keep things simple. You have
Yeah.
to break down really complex things in a way that they can understand.
Yeah.
That's one thing. So first, I love children. So, and when I wanted to start writing children's picture books, I think I underestimated how difficult it is because you think, okay, it's fewer words, but writing novels, I always say you have the room to make mistakes. When you have 90,000 words or you have whatever thousand words, so maybe a part of the story might be a little soggy, it's not as crisp. But when you're writing a children's picture book, you don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
Kind of like playing around for too long. You have to keep things tight. And children, if they don't like something, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
Right? They're not gonna like,
Mhm.
this sucks. Just throw it up, done. Move
Yeah.
on. Move on to the next thing.
I mean, it's a good thing too, because then it makes you realize
Yeah.
you have to tighten
Yeah.
your belt. Yeah.
Yeah. So for my children's picture books, I actually had children were my beta readers.
Oh,
And
good.
so the age group of the children I was writing for. And they gave me some fantastic feedback. I had children who were Nigerian children. I had children who were Canadian children who read the book. And so I wanted to have this to the different perspectives, right? And so when I started writing children's book, the first book I wrote was anxiety. And I wrote that, I actually wrote it for me. Like I said, a lot of me is in my work because I've had struggle with anxiety all my life. And I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know what it was. I was always worried about something. Every time I was little. Like I was always like, oh, is the sky gonna fall down? Is this gonna happen? Is the wind going to? I was always. Where I remember my poor mother would be like, "What is wrong with this child?" Like, like like you're always. So I didn't have a word for it, and
Mm-hmm.
so until like I started now counseling children who had anxiety disorders, and I wanted to write a book that an 8-year-old Yejide would have read
Oh,
and
wow.
would have given context to that for
Mm.
her. And so that was why that book was for me, because I was like, if I'd read it when I was younger, I would have understood rather why I was, going through all the things I was going through, because I didn't have the words, and people around me just said, oh, you just worry too much.
Mm.
But they didn't understand that, just stop worrying. Just stop worrying. Doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. There's an internal dialogue that you have to have with yourself.
Yeah, that it just doesn't work. And so that's why I started writing children's books. So the first one was on anxiety. And then the funny thing was, so after I wrote the first book and I dedicated to my daughter, I have 3 children. I was like, now I have to write 2 more. Like,
So each child is a book.
so I was like, if I'd known, I would have dedicated that book to all 3, and then I would
Yeah.
have been covered. I was like, man, now you have to write 2 more.
Yes, and
And
go ahead.
yeah, so that was a practical piece. I'm like, okay, fine. Now you have to write 2 more, and then I'm like, okay. I always say anger is like the other side of anxiety. Like there's a coin, right? Either you're internalizing your emotions, you're externalizing them. So that was why anger became the second book, which is Juba and the Fireball. And then when I was thinking about what was going to be the third book, and I think the inspiration for that really was my son, because I have 3 kids, as I said, or they're all adults now, they're young adults, but one of my children has special needs,
Okay.
and so as a mom who's had to raise a child with special needs, I know how quite challenging that is, and
Okay.
how and so that was why when I was going to write the third book, I made sure that it was so it was a book about a child with a special need,
Okay.
because I also felt that people don't in Nigeria, especially, even anywhere, like in terms of that representation piece of saying what it is, it must be like, to for the parents, for the children to exist in that space. And so
Mm.
that was why, so the other side of small, my third children's book that's not out yet, is coming out sometime next year.
Yeah.
It's about a little girl living with dwarfism.
Okay.
And so yeah, so that was my, so at this point I don't know, I'm still flirting like what's the next direction for me, when I would like to do a middle grade book. um
Okay.
so maybe that might, or a young adult book, so maybe that might be the next one. I don't know yet. School has been schooling me for the past 2 years.
How much longer do you have?
I'm just halfway through,
Okay, so you
so I
you
have
you
2 more
you
years.
you've made good progress.
Yes, I'm halfway through, so I have 2 more years. And so the past 2 years, I haven't been writing like new stuff. It's
Okay.
been editing old work, other books that I already had planned, and yeah. So I'm hoping by the time I'm done in 2026, then I can actually like breathe.
Yeah. And we'll be here for it. I mean, going back to our conversation, one of the recurring themes in your writing is the way empowerment. I mean, you use your children's books and your adults books, your short fiction. You empower through fiction, and much of your work addresses themes like abuse, resilience, hope. I wanted to just step back a little bit and ask, what role do you think fiction plays in empowering individuals and communities to confront difficult realities? We're from Nigeria. It's not an easy place to live, grow up in. Um, so how do we use our fiction to empower a lot of people who find themselves in vulnerable situations? And the other side of that question is there a particular way you prefer to showcase the Nigerian experience based on your experience as a Nigerian living in the diaspora and telling Nigerian stories?
I think first, I think what reading for me did for me was that it showed me what could be, right?
Powerful.
Because when you look around you and you're like, okay, this is what is. But I think fiction has the power to show what could be. So
Mm,
offering a different ending or a different reality. And so, so when I, for me as a child, I'll be like, oh, okay, so this is a possibility. And so I think that's a power of a story. One, you feel that you're not alone, that there's somebody else who has experienced the same thing you've experienced. And then it also shows you that, you know what, this could be. Because when everything around you is just so, like so, when you talk about the Nigerian experience, where sometimes we've had some issues that have been long-standing, and I'm thinking, like some areas where they haven't had light, like or running water in years, and so how that's very hard for a child who grew up in that to think that there's a possibility. And sadly, as the years gone by, because now I'm almost 50. And I still have memories of when things were better. But I imagine that, people who are in their 20s, I wonder if they have any memories of when things were better.
Okay, let me just pause there. You have memories of when things, because we're about the same age. You have memories of when things were better in Nigeria.
Better than now?
Okay, better than now. Okay.
Better than now?
Yeah, because when and I'm sorry I interrupted you, but when I sit down with our parents' generation and they talk about, how the roaring 70s and how it was when, Nigeria was newly independent, I don't have memories. I mean, it's not like it was all bad, but it wasn't fantastic. So that's I'm like I want to know what memories you're talking about, because there's always some oppression happening in Nigeria.
I think it's context, right? Yeah. So when you're saying better, like if you're comparing, like there weren't kidnappings like they were like.
That's true. That is true. That is true.
Right? You could still drive. Yeah. You could still drive around. At some time at night. So when I mean better, it wasn't always grand.
Yeah.
Right? So So, but it wasn't this state of where people are just living in. Breaks your heart. Like people cannot eat. They cannot.
Yeah, that's true.
Like yes, you go to the bank. It was back in the like there was now you go to the bank. There's no money at all.
Yeah.
So when I mean better. Not like
I understand now. Yeah. And I don't want our listeners to think that we're just dumbing down on Nigeria. This is the reality. We love our country. We both do. But then we come from a country where there's some fantastically talented people, but the leadership has made it so difficult for that, for them to be able to find their optimum and be able to thrive. But yes. So in terms of diasporic writing, do you face challenges as a writer trying to convey the complexity of the Nigerian culture to a largely Western audience? Because if the truth is, I like what you said, and this applies to me as well. I'm not writing for, let me just say that my primary audience is the Nigerian, irrespective of where you are. But then I also don't kid myself and know that non-Nigerians are going to read my book or whatever I write. And I think it's the same with you. So how do you kind of like draw the line between conveying everything and this is just part of what we've just talked about, because if other Nigerians were listening to what we were saying in terms of when was it ever good, and then we talked about the kidnappings, they would get it. But then non-Nigerian would be like, the kidnapping your country, the nervousness, but we understand what it is. So how do you convey that sort of information in a way that enlightens, informs, and kind of showcases the country in a way that it's supposed to be without sugarcoating things?
I think one of the things that I always think is that whether it's Nigerian writers, African writers, in terms of how, in the sense that we have to be that we have to be the champion. Because I always wonder, I'm like, even Canadians writing, I don't know if they're sitting there thinking, oh, how do I write this in a way that I'm showcasing Canada, good light or something. So I feel like that, in a sense, I try not to put that burden on myself.
That's good. That's
right.
Good.
Because I'm like, there other people are not sitting down and thinking, oh, how do I portray, like it's fiction, it's factual in a way that, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, unless I'm writing a genre like it's all sci-fi, I'm like, oh yeah, in Nigeria we have people who are flying, they're flying, they're like half bad, half science fiction or something, which it's a legit genre, like, and that's it could be that story, right? But yeah, so I try not to think of like, okay, I'm not writing. The intention is not to write something that would sensationalize something or make it like, oh, like a shocking to like, oh my God, come read this. That my intention is to write the story I want to write. My intention is to be true to the characters. Because I always feel like I can hear them. To be true to the characters and the stories they're telling me. Versus letting myself be caught up in like, oh, am I doing justice to the, Nigeria's image, or am I doing justice to this tribe, or am I doing justice? I'm a storyteller. And I know that, of course, I think there was I'm talking about a Achebe quote that talk about, like even we all often talk about what is the role of a writer in social activism, like social justice, and so there's just so at the core of it, I'm a writer. And I'm writing the things that represent. It's not going to be for everybody.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
not going to be for everybody. And so just having some peace in that. Do I think that it's important that I think for me the core is the story true to the characters and to what it is they intend me to convey.
And so I'm glad that you said that, because when I tell people that the characters are the ones who are telling me to how the story is told, they're like, okay, it's almost like you're cuckoo, but that's the reality of the writing process. Who are some of the writers that you read and who have influenced your writing?
I would say, I think I'm trying to think of, so like these days I do a lot of, I think I liked the Bolu Babalola.
Yes. Oh, I have that
Yes.
right in front of me. Loving
Yes.
Color.
Yes,
Exceptionally good.
I really loved her short story, because I love mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love that play.
Oh, wow, good. Quick story. I think she has a story in there called Alago Meiji.
Yeah.
And I grew up around Alago Meiji.
In Lagos.
Yeah, and I remember seeing that in fiction, and I almost had like a tear just pulled in my eyes, because I'm like, yes. Alago Meiji is finally represented. So Bolu Babalola, I know that you and I connected years ago when Buchie Mecheta.
Yes.
And I know that she's someone that you read.
Yes, as a child. Yes.
Yeah.
The Joy of Motherhood.
Yes.
Yeah, The Joy of Motherhood. Because I remember reading that book. Because I think I was probably I was in boarding school, like I said, when I was home for holidays. And at one time I was oh my goodness, I have an avid Emma Mills and Boons reader.
Oh, me and you connect. Harlequin, Mills and Boons.
Oh, the Barbara Catlin.
Yes. We had a similar reading experience.
Yes. They had all the steamy covers, right?
Yes,
exactly. We used to cover them up with newspapers.
Oh my goodness! I just wrote about that in a book I'm writing. And then the other one that was James Hadley Chase and Harold. So you have all these scantily clad women, but it had nothing to do with the story, because it was So I never understood the connection. But you couldn't be seen reading those kinds of books. Like
exactly. And so, but Joy of Motherhood, I think one of the covers has, an African mother carrying a baby on her back, or something on her head, and pounding. So my mom's like, okay, this is a respectable book, But I think when I read that book, and why I still remember it to today, is just how things seem to have not changed. Like for women in Nigeria, because I was just like, because I read it, I was like, we're still talking about the same things like years after. And so yeah, she was a fantastic writer. Buchie Mecheta was just a fantastic writer. And I think it was just about that book. I think what I walked away from was like, because in the end I was upset. I was like, why didn't she do something? Why didn't but I always say we do the best we can, and that's like with what we have.
Yeah.
Right. And it's easy to sit in judgment of somebody's choices, and to sit in judgment of what it is that but you don't walk in their shoes. And I always say, even if we have the same shoe size, we don't have the same thread pattern. So maybe my my feet, like I wear my shoes and all my heels are like kind of slanted to one side. You slant your heels to one side. So even if you walk in somebody's shoes, it's not the same experience.
I mean, still on Buchie Mecheta and recently I saw an interview that she had done on British TV, and she had talked about how her husband, the very first book that she'd ever written, her husband had burnt the manuscript. And I was like, how do you even live with that kind of oppression? Because I don't know how she remained sane to the point where she was able to continue to write, because it's such a violation of on so many levels, where your creation is burnt, and not for any reason, just because he could, and just because of the role that the patriarchy plays. And so and again, I can just imagine, she's no longer with us, may her soul rest in peace, and I thank her for all her creation, but I can imagine that for her it must have been an emotional release writing the books that she wrote, because undergoing that sort of oppression. I mean, we're coming close to the end of our conversation and I'm having such a nice time, but all good things must come to an end. I'm asking all of my guests, what do you miss the most about living in Nigeria?
Like, it's funny, anytime I dream of home, I always dream of where I grew up in Ibadan. Like, I grew up in UI, inside university, and I just picture, like, because my dad liked eating akara. Both my parents are gone now. Every Saturday morning, and I would picture, we're all together and we're frying akara, we're dancing. I was always a dancer girl in my house. I'm the oldest,
Uh,
so oldest of five. And I'm sure sometimes people are like, where did they find this child?
oh my
I'm
goodness.
very different from my siblings.
Oh.
I'm very different. Like, I was always the one, like, talker one, like the outgoing one. I'm very different from them. I'm sure my mother was like, where did we find this child? But I think when I think of what I miss them.
Those
I miss that. And because I feel like, if I could go back to those times where they were all here, when my parents were here, my grandmother was still here, my grandparents were here, I think that's what I miss, the sense of home it gave me. Because I feel that, so that's gone. And so that's what because I think the last time the last two times I went to Nigeria was to funerals for my parents. And I remember because anytime I get into Lagos, that's the first person I call, my mom. And I remember when I went for her funeral and I called, and I still called even though I knew that she wasn't there.
I
Or
know
maybe
that.
a part of me was hoping that she would pick up. And then was like, okay, what if she really picks up? Like,
No, but I understand. I mean, grief is a really, because I actually had the same thing, because I've also lost my mom, and I remember I would tell everyone when shortly after she died that I lost my mom. I'll tell complete strangers, and there was a hope that I would get from them saying that, no, you didn't. Your mom's sitting right next to you. I was hoping somebody would say that, because you just don't want to lose that. Yeah. So I get it. I get it.
So I think that's what I miss. I miss that I don't, like, I miss what was. Because because the Nigeria that is now wasn't the one I grew up in,
No, it
right?
was.
Everybody is gone. So I think it was, and they were my sense of home. And I remember saying, I feel like an orphan. Like, I'm 41. I'm like, I'm an orphan. I don't have any parents. Because it was such an odd thing for me, like, to
Yeah.
exist in a world where I didn't have parents. Because in a way they were my roots. And now I'm like, well, and I'm like, well, you're a parent yourself now and you have your own family, but it was just different. And I still struggle with it. Because it was actually in November. They both passed in November. It was 11 months and 2 weeks
Oh, wow.
between their passing. So it was just like, so my mom will be 5 years this month. My dad will be 6 years this month. And so it was just, so I think that's what I wish I could go back. So someday, maybe just one day, if I could travel back, do like a time travel, that I could travel back. It'd be a Saturday morning. We'll be frying akara, and there'll be music, and I'll be dancing, and my siblings were like rolling their eyes, like, "Oh my God, where have we found this one?" And so I feel like I was an ugly duckling. That really I was a swan, but I kind of got lost when like, like I was like, and so that would be the best for me for just one Saturday. Like, I could just sit and I would just be home.
Oh my goodness. And what music would be playing, do you think?
Oh, I was a Fuji girl.
Okay, let's hear it.
I love music, period. Right.
Yeah.
My dad, we actually on the day of his funeral we played, because he loved country music. And
Okay.
had a turntable, and he would play Dolly Parton. He would play,
Okay.
and so at his "I'll Always Love You," we played that as his
Okay.
line of state at his funeral, because my dad loves country music, and so yeah. But he played all kinds of music. He played Bob Marley. He played, yeah. My dad was just, he loved music. So we had all these different LPs, and yeah, so we'd just be playing music, and I'll just be dancing. I still dance. And yeah, it would just be for that moment. I know, I'm sure even if I was in that moment, I would know like this is just temporary. But just to soak that in one more time would be fantastic.
Oh, wow. Well, let me join my listeners in, telling you, may your parents' souls continue to rest in peace. And it's clear that their memories are a blessing to you, and may it always be so. So what advice would you give to Nigerian or African writers in the diaspora who want to tell stories that feel authentic to them?
Do it. Right? It has to feel, if you say you don't want to tell stories that feel authentic to you, then write stories that are authentic to you. Like, I think your story is not going to be for everybody. And
Yes.
there's always a part of writing, there's the business side of it. Right. So it's like, so it's not the best stories that necessarily get published.
That is true.
Right. So there's a writing part, there's a creative part, there's a business part. They're like, oh, well, we already have a story that, on this topic, so we don't need another story, or this is what is selling, and I think for me, how I've been able to resolve that is, Yejide, will you keep writing if you don't sell another book? And I will.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said it, because people who are not in this business don't understand that the writing part is the easy part. It's the other things that happen that make it a lot harder to navigate this business that we're in. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, again, I hear you saying to the aspiring writers, don't let that, challenge stop you from doing what you have to do and telling the stories. So I wanted to I know you've kind of like teased that you have the other side of Small coming out as your next children's book. But what else should we expect from you? Any upcoming projects that you're exploring in or themes that you're exploring in your future work?
So future work. So I would like to do a young adult book, maybe something around mental health. Or short story collection. A short story collection.
Because you haven't done that, have you? You don't have a story collection.
No, I haven't. And I've been writing quite some short
stories. Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe that would be it, but I don't know. I'm like, you know what? I'd like to write a middle grade book. And that was the funny thing. Like, so my short story that was shortlisted for the Caine Prize, this tangible thing, actually came from a middle grade book. So I started writing a middle grade book. I called it Labby. That was the working title. And Labby was about a child who was born in Canada but had never been to Nigeria, and so was taken back home to see her grandmother, just like it was an intangible thing. But then I was just really struggling with the book, so like, because I've been going back for years, and so when I wanted to write a short story for the Caine Prize, I took parts of the tangible from Labby, and that helped me in a way, helped me solidify the characters. So now I'm like, maybe I can go back to the middle book now and maybe really then work with it. But or maybe not. Maybe that the whole essence of that journey with that book was to get that short story. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's the adventure of writing. You really don't know what's waiting for you around the corner, but I mean, you're still excited to see it. Thank you so much for your time. I know that you have a lot on your plate, but I want to just thank you for the way the conversation that we've had today, the layers of culture, identity, and creative responsibility involved in telling the Nigerian story are not easy, but we make it happen. And I wish you all the best with your studies, family life, and I look forward. I mean, I always enjoy reading your work, so I will be one of the ones waiting to see the other side of Small when it comes.
I just remember I do have a novel too So I have an adult book coming out soon next year too. It's called In Our Own Ways.
In Our Own Ways. Okay. Thank you for telling us that.
Just I'm like, oh, don't, because In Our Own Ways, like, listen, why don't you talk about me? Like, is this personal?
Okay.
In
Our Own Ways comes out when?
So sometime next year. It's coming up on Narrative Landscape. So just a little bit about In Our Own Ways. So that was so I talked about Daughters 2010. When I was still working on Daughters, I'd be like, okay, I need a break. I need something else to work on. And so I started a new manuscript in 2010, in the fall of 2010. And people were laughing. They were like, oh, you were writing about, child sexual abuse, and you're saying that you need a break, and then you start writing about domestic violence. And how much of a break was that? And so I started a manuscript called When Land Spirits Cross Big Waters.
Wow.
And so talking about migration. And so in that particular manuscript was what was broken down into 3 books. So
yes, we've had this conversation before.
So the first book was Chasing Butterflies, my novella. The second book is A Good Name. So this is the concluding book.
Oh, good.
Of that manuscript. So this is a contribute. So they all have the thread to them about couples. So all 3 of them have Nigerian couples. The first couple lived entirely in the States, from Chasing Butterflies. The couple, A Good Name. So A Good Name has scenes from Nigeria and also has scenes in the States. While my final book that's coming out is entirely set in Nigeria.
Oh, good.
I look forward. So so that's the thread. So it's been so since 2010. So it's taken
quite a journey. 15 years. 15 years it's coming out.
Yes.
Next year.
Yeah. So about 15 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's the resilience that we have to have as writers. I remember talking to a writer who said that she'd written the book 10 years ago. It didn't get 10 years before it got published. And, you have to really have a thick skin and a strong mind and the patience of a saint to do this work that we do. And, this conversation that we had has definitely clarified that. So definitely keep on keeping on with everything that you're doing.
You too, and wishing everyone who's listening take care of yourself. We're living in a very challenging time, right?
Oh my goodness,
it's challenging everywhere. No matter what part of the world globe you're living in, times are hard. So take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. Our will live to fight another day. We can't solve all the problems of the world in one day.
No, we can't. Yes, you said it. Thank you, Yejide Kilanko. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you so much.
All right. I really do hope you will take Yejide's advice to heart. Please take care of you and yours in spite of everything that might be going on around you. Thank you for listening. On the next episode of Tokunbo.
One of the unintended consequences of globalization is that thinkers, writers, professional folks like us can afford to take our families away from the scene of the crime. And while we stay there and pretend to be running the place.